Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Let's start this episode with a simple question. If everything you know about history came from a school textbook, how much do you really know? Because history isn't just a list of dates and discoveries, it's a story. And stories are never neutral. They're crafted, curated, designed, shaped by those who won, and often weaponized against those who didn't. See, we've been told that history is a mirror, that by studying the past, we understand the present. But what if that mirror has been warped? What if the past we've been handed was engineered? What we're taught in schools isn't just information, it's orientation into our modern world. It tells you who you are, where you come from, what kind of species you belong to. It tells you that civilization rose slowly, out of need, that we moved from caves to cities, out of innovation and necessity. It's a comforting story. It's clean, linear, and rational. But what if that's not how it really happened? This is where we enter what I call the second narrative, the version of history that's been served to us in classrooms, printed in glossy textbooks, and reinforced by every documentary shown in school. This version tells us that we were once primitive, nomadic, and dumb, that we slowly figured things out, invented farming, built cities, created laws, and eventually invented the smartphone. It's a secular creation myth, one that replaces the Garden of Eden with Mesopotamia and the divine spark with a pile of flint tools. And it's not just told as history, it's sold as the truth. But here's the twist. This version of history doesn't just tell us what happened, it tells us what's allowed to have happened. Because history, as it's taught, isn't about understanding the past. It's about protecting the present. Who gets remembered? Who gets erased? Which events are highlighted and which are buried? What's explained and what's left in the shadow? To show you how this works, I'll be referencing a real textbook, World History by Elizabeth Gaynor Ellis and Anthony Esler. It's the kind of book that has shaped millions of minds. The kind that becomes a blueprint for how students see the arc of humanity. And once you look closely, you begin to notice the gaps, the edits, the omissions. The second narrative doesn't lie outright. It just leaves out everything that doesn't fit the narrative. Ancient anomalies, megalithic structures no primitive tribe could have built. The whispers of civilizations older than time, ignored. The result? A carefully manicured timeline that makes us think we're at the peak of progress, when in truth, we may be a civilization with amnesia. And the question we're here to ask is simple. Why construct such a limited, sanitized version of our origin? Why hide the ruins that speak of forgotten giants and lost wisdom? Why strip the world of its myth, its magic, its mystery? Because the more disconnected we are from our true past, the easier we are to program for the future. So, in this episode, we begin to peel back the layers, not to discredit history, but to understand how narrative can be weaponized, how memory can be manipulated, and how the timeline we've been taught might just be the biggest cover story ever told. Welcome to the second narrative. Let's begin with the official story. Before writing, before cities, before anything resembling civilization, we are told that the world was populated by hunters and gatherers, small groups moving with the seasons, following animals, gathering food, and shaping stone tools. Then, around 10,000 BCE, something changed. The Neolithic Revolution began. People started planting crops instead of only hunting and gathering. They domesticated animals. Villages formed. Permanent settlements grew. Agriculture created surplus. Surplus created trade. Trade created complexity. And from that complexity came the first cities, laws, temples, and hierarchies. By roughly 3000 BCE, the first great civilizations emerged along the river valleys of the ancient world. Mesopotamia rose between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Egypt flourished along the Nile. The Indus Valley built cities such as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. In China, early dynasties formed along the Yellow River. According to the second narrative, civilizations emerged gradually from necessity. Humanity began with survival and slowly climbed the ladder towards complexity. But when you look more closely, some parts of that ladder begin to buckle. Now, something about this story, this perfectly polished version of how we naturally progressed, doesn't sit right. Because when you step back and actually look at it, the mainstream historical timeline starts to feel less like a history and more like a script. A script designed to be memorized, not questioned. According to this version, civilization is a straight line, beginning with farming, followed by cities, law, writing, kings, temples, and then finally us. And yet, it's so boring. It's the most unimaginative story ever told. And maybe that's the point. We're taught that civilization began with clay pots, stone huts, and the slow domestication of animals. That human brilliance came in tiny, accidental increments. That anything before 3000 BCE is myth or madness. But what if that's not true? What if the story we've been given isn't boring because that's how it happened, but because the truth is far more complex and far more dangerous to our current system? Because buried beneath the second narrative is a different timeline, one that suggests our past isn't linear, it's layered. And if you're willing to dig, even just a little, you'll begin to find sites that don't fit the script at all. So let's put down that textbook and pick up a chisel, because buried beneath the narrative is a site that rewrites it entirely. Located in southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe dates back roughly 11,600 years ago. That makes it thousands of years older than Stonehenge and the pyramids of Egypt. But Göbekli Tepe was not just a pile of stones. It was a ceremonial complex. Massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing more than 10 tons, were arranged in circular formations and carved with animals, symbols, and patterns. The site required planning, coordination, labor, shared purpose, and it was built near the dawn of agriculture, before civilization was supposed to have developed the social organization required for projects of this scale. Göbekli Tepe does not prove that an advanced lost civilization existed, but it does challenge the simplest version of the story. It suggests that the transition from primitive survival to organized civilization may not have happened as gradually as we were taught. And Göbekli Tepe is not the only site that raises questions. Travel southwest to Egypt, and you'll hear the same whispers of contradiction. We're told the Great Pyramids of Giza were built around 2500 BCE. And in the second narrative, they're mentioned, but only briefly. A few paragraphs about ropes, sleds, and tens of thousands of workers stacking stones for 20 to 30 years. But the closer you look, the more absurd that version starts to sound. Because the pyramids aren't just big, they're precise. The Great Pyramid is aligned almost perfectly to true north. Its base encodes pi and the golden ratio. Its height and width, when scaled, reveal the exact curvature and diameter of the Earth. Knowledge we didn't officially rediscover until thousands of years later. Oh, and here's another fun fact. The latitude of the Great Pyramid is 29.9792458 degrees north. The speed of light, 792,458 meters per second. Is that a coincidence? Maybe one, maybe even two, but five? At what point does coincidence become design? And then there's the sky. Some researchers have proposed that the 3 pyramids of Giza mirror the 3 stars of Orion's belt. If true, that raises some important questions. Why were ancient builders so preoccupied with celestial alignment? Why did they orient monuments toward the heavens with such care? We will return to the Great Pyramid later. For now, let it stand as another pressure point. Another reminder that ancient engineers were more sophisticated than the second narrative has led us to believe. Then there's Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon. The Roman temple of Jupiter was built upon a foundation containing enormous stone blocks, some weighing hundreds of tons. These are not small stones arranged by chance. They were quarried, moved, leveled, and placed deliberately. Again, Baalbek does not prove a forgotten civilization either, but it forces the same question. How much have we underestimated the builders of the ancient world? Göbekli Tepe, the Great Pyramid, Baalbek, different regions, different eras, yet the same themes keep reappearing. Megalithic construction, celestial orientation, lost context, forgotten builders. So what are we looking at? Are these isolated achievements? Or are they fragments of a much older knowledge system? What if some of the sites we call the beginning of civilization were not beginnings at all? What if they were remnants? What if Göbekli Tepe was not the first spark, but one of the last embers still burning after a collapse? What we call primitive might sometimes be post-collapse, and what we call myth might sometimes be memory. The second narrative encourages us to see history as a straight line, but ancient cultures often understood time differently. They saw cycles, ages, rises and falls, creation, destruction, and renewal. Maybe history is not a ladder. Maybe it's a spiral. Civilizations rise, they build, they fracture, then they collapse. And something survives, a symbol, a story, a ritual, a memory, which leads us to the next question. Who carried those memories forward? So who were they? One possible answer comes from anthropologist Robert Sepper, who poses a haunting question in his book, Species with Amnesia.
Did an advanced human race once walk the earth, only to vanish, leaving behind clues we were trained not to see?
To begin answering that, we need to go back to 1868, when human remains were discovered in the rock shelter of Aubry Cro-Magnon in southwestern France. These were early modern humans, Cro-Magnons. They were not half-formed cavemen struggling toward humanity. They were us. And their culture was far more sophisticated than the stereotype suggests. They produced advanced stone tools, ornaments, carvings, needles, and musical instruments. In fact, each cultural layer tied to them, the Aurignacian, the Solutrean, and the The question is not whether Cro-Magnons were human, they were. The question is whether we have underestimated what they knew. Because some alternative researchers have asked whether the gaps between cultures in the prehistoric record point to a lost source of knowledge beyond the familiar boundaries of the textbook timeline, toward the Atlantic, toward the ancient stories of catastrophe, toward the memory of a civilization swallowed by the sea, Atlantis. That does not prove the Cro-Magnons came from Atlantis, but it gives us a question worth pursuing. Could some prehistoric cultures have preserved fragments of knowledge inherited from an earlier world? Because the Cro-Magnons did not leave behind only tools. They left behind art, and some of that art may have been encoding something far larger than hunting scenes. Deep inside the Lascaux caves in France, the walls come alive with images created roughly 17,000 years ago. Bulls, deer, horses, symbols and patterns. The usual explanation is that these paintings were connected to hunting rituals or shamanic practices. But one French researcher, Chantal Jegs-Walkouis, proposed something more. She argued that some of the images may reflect the night sky. One painting in particular shows a bull with a cluster of 6 dots above it and 4 dots positioned in front. Jegs-Walkouis proposed that the bull represents Taurus. The 6 dots above it represent the Pleiades cluster, and the 4 dots in front are Orion. Now, place the images side by side, and the resemblance is difficult to ignore. You can make up your own mind about whether you think the cave paintings represent Taurus, Pleiades, and Orion, or not. But for now, for this series, we're going to say that it does, which means the Cro-Magnons were not merely painting animals, they were mapping the heavens. Why does that matter? Because the same constellations return again and again. At Lascaux, we may see Taurus, the Pleiades cluster, and Orion painted onto the cave walls. At Giza, Orion appears again in stone. Different cultures, different eras, but the same stars. That does not prove a single global civilization, but it does raise a deeper question. Were ancient cultures preserving a shared memory of the sky? A knowledge system passed down not through textbooks, but through symbols. The Cro-Magnons were not mindless cave dwellers clinging to survival as we've been taught. They were observers. They watched the sky. They tracked cycles. They created art with intention. Long before temples were built, before cities rose, before written history officially began, human beings were already looking upward and encoding meaning into stone. So maybe the story of civilization didn't begin in Sumer. Maybe parts of it survived in places like Lascaux. So here we are. We've walked through the ruins of the second narrative, the tidy tale we were all taught, where civilization begins with wheat and ends with Wi-Fi. But the deeper we look, the more that story unravels. Because we've seen the fingerprints of something far older. Göbekli Tepe, the Great Pyramids, Baalbek, civilizations that weren't supposed to exist, and yet do. We've traced the arrival of the Cro-Magnons, not as primitives, but as carriers of knowledge, builders of settlements, trackers of stars. We've seen the Lascaux caves, not as primitive art, but as a cosmic memory. And all of it points toward a forgotten world. Not a myth, not a fantasy, but a memory, buried beneath textbooks, beneath dogma, beneath the machinery of approved knowledge. So the question now isn't just what happened back then, it's what happened to them? Who silenced their story? Who decided we weren't ready to remember? And more importantly, why? Because, as I mentioned in the beginning, history is never neutral. It's not a passive recounting of facts. It's a weapon. As Orwell warned, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Control the origin story, and you control identity. Control identity, and you control behavior. Control behavior, and you shape reality. That's why it matters whether civilizations began 5,000 or 15,000 years ago. Because what we believe about our past limits what we believe is possible for our future. If we're just lucky monkeys who figured out farming, then we're fragile, accidental, powerless. But if we're the descendants of something greater, if we're the inheritors of lost wisdom, buried civilizations, and a star-born memory, then we are so much more than what we've been told. And if that's true, then what else have we forgotten? Or worse, what have we been made to forget? Every crack in the second narrative points to something underneath it, a deeper system, a hidden hand, a story still unfolding in the shadows. And that's where we go next, because the third narrative isn't just about history. It's about power. It's about inversion. It's about a force that has rewritten the story of humanity, not just in textbooks, but in our blood, our minds, and our souls. It's the story behind the story. And once you start to see it, you can't unsee it. So take a breath, sharpen your vision, because in the next episode, we descend past the ruins and enter the cathedral of the unseen. I'll see you in the next episode.